The Hall of Infinite Precedent was a monument to cold, unyielding logic. Its walls, forged from quantum lattice crystal, refracted light into geometric perfection, casting razor-sharp shadows that never dared to blur. The air hummed with the subsonic resonance of 1,000 legal archives, each verdict, each statute, each immutable truth etched into the very fabric of the chamber. Here, in the heart of the galactic arbitration panel, law was not a tool, it was a sacred geometry, and its architects were beings of pure, unassailable intellect. High Arbiter Zyke 7 floated at the center of the chamber, their form a shifting tessellation of iridescent planes, each facet representing a different strand of legal doctrine. To the untrained eye, they might have resembled a living diamond, but humanity, ever the irreverent observers, had taken to calling them the angry paperweight in private missives. Not that Zyke 7 would ever deign to acknowledge such a slight. Their voice, when it came, was the sound of a glacier calving in slow motion, deliberate, inevitable, and utterly devoid of warmth. This session convenes to address the species designation, Homo sapiens. Classification, disruptive. A ripple passed through the assembled jurists, a symphony of clicking mandibles, vibrating membranes, and bioluminescent flares that constituted alien disapproval. The panel was a tapestry of the galaxy's most meticulous legal minds, the Kaith Mor, their crystalline exoskeletons inscribed with precedent, the Vethuri, whose tentacles wove through holographic briefs with surgical precision, the Nyxandra, their multiple heads debating in silent, telepathic unison, all of them united in one unshakable belief: the law was perfect. And humanity had spent the last decade proving it wasn't. The record will reflect, Zyke 7 continued, that human legal engagements have resulted in 17 violations of interstellar trade accords, 9 exploitations of colonization statutes, and, most egregiously, 3 instances where the species circumvented formal declarations of war through semantic reinterpretation. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying Earth's most infamous legal triumphs, a merchant fleet dodging tariffs by reclassifying cargo as diplomatic gifts, a colony ship landing on a non-inhabitable moon by arguing its methane atmosphere was technically breathable. For bacteria, a planetary invasion halted because the attackers had failed to use the phrase "state of hostilities" in their missive. Jurist Bexlath of the Kaith Mor pulsed an indigo flare. This is not law. This is chaos given syntax. Chaos, Zyke 7 agreed. That will be rectified. They extended a crystalline appendage, and the chamber's central podium reconfigured into a towering edifice of scrolling text, the proposed universal legal framework for human containment. Today, we construct a statute without fissures. A law so flawless, so absolute, that not even these creatures can twist its meaning. This was their purpose, to prune the universe of disorder. They had tamed supernovae with zoning laws, negotiated peace between warring dimensions with liability clauses, and once even fined a black hole for improper waste disposal. Humanity would be no different. But in the shadows of the gallery, unnoticed by the luminaries of cosmic order, a single human observer tapped at a datapad. Their notes were succinct. Banals, fatal flaw, assumes loopholes are bugs. Humanity knows their features. The message vanished into the void, bound for a place the panel had never thought to legislate: Earth's newly formed Bureau of Creative Compliance. The game, as humans like to say, was on. The Hall of Infinite Precedent had never seen a defendant like Dr. Elias Vance. He arrived late, deliberately, the panel would later realize, striding into the crystalline chamber with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already won. His suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and beneath one arm he carried a battered briefcase that had clearly survived at least 3 interstellar wars. The High Arbiter Zyke-7's ocular filaments twitched in disapproval as Vance paused to adjust a malfunctioning holoprojector, muttering something about cheap alien tech under his breath. Behind him trailed his team, a wiry linguist with a perpetual smirk, a historian whose datapads were held together by literal duct tape, and a former con artist who kept winking at the bailiffs. The panel's collective exoskeletons rattled in unease. These were not the polished advocates of civilized species. These were humans. "Apologies for the delay," Vance said, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was hell." "You'd think a galactic superpower could afford better transit lanes." Zyke-7's voice was a glacial hum. The Bureau of Creative Compliance was summoned to answer for humanity's flagrant disregard of interstellar law, not to critique infrastructure. Vance grinned. But that's where you're wrong, High Arbiter. Infrastructure is law, or at least it is when you're arguing transit rights under subsection 47B of the Galactic Trade Accords. He snapped his fingers. Lien tossed him a datapad. Which, by the way, your enforcers violated twice just getting us here. So if we're discussing flagrant disregard, the chamber erupted in a chorus of outraged harmonics. Vance waited, tapping his foot, until the noise subsided. "You see the problem," he said, spreading his hands. "Your laws are perfect, impeccable, flawless." He paused, and utterly, catastrophically blind to the fact that reality is messy. The historian, Professor Ruiz, coughed. "Case in point, the Treaty of Zenthar Minor, 12,000 years ago. Your ancestors defined sentient life so precisely that they accidentally excluded an entire species of telepathic fungi, who, incidentally, later ate the arbitration team sent to correct the error." A ripple of discomfort passed through the panel. The con artist, a woman introduced only as Jinx, leaned forward. "And let's not forget the real kicker, your watertight ban on AI warfare? The one that specified non-organic intelligence?" She smirked. "Turns out, human cyborgs are technically organic." Whoops. Vance let the words hang, watching the alien jurist process the implications. The hall's crystalline walls seemed to dim, as if the very architecture recoiled from the heresy of imperfection. Zyke-7's voice was dangerously quiet. "You are suggesting that millennia of legal doctrine, you are a starting point, not a cage," Vance finished. He flipped open his briefcase, revealing a stack of paper. Actual paper. The panel recoiled as if had produced a live grenade. Humanity's greatest legal weapon isn't deception, it's context. The unspoken assumptions, the cultural blind spots, the gaps your perfect logic never noticed because you never had to. He slapped a document onto the central podium, like this. The Galactic Charter, Article 14, Clause 3, no species shall claim sovereignty over celestial bodies designated as sacred by native cultures. He turned to Ruiz. "Professor?" Ruiz adjusted his cracked glasses. "Turns out, in 213-4, a human cult declared all unclaimed asteroids sacred to the Church of the Cosmic Void." He shrugged. "We've got the paperwork." The silence was absolute. Vance leaned in. "You wanted to constrain us. Fine, but you'll have to do better than perfect laws." His smile was razor sharp. "You'll have to outthink us." And with that, the game began. The Hall of Infinite Precedent hummed with the restrained fury of 1,000 legal minds forced to acknowledge an inconvenient truth. High Arbiter Zyke-7's crystalline form pulsed with irritation, its fractal edges flickering like a malfunctioning hologram. The human's last move, invoking a religious claim to bypass colonization restrictions, had been absurd, yet legally unassailable. Zyke-7 adjusted the resonance of its voice to convey absolute authority. "This panel will now address the primary infraction, human exploitation of inhabitable world classifications under Statute 47, Alpha." A holographic projection bloomed above the central dais, displaying a planetarium of worlds humanity had colonized. By our definition, inhabitable requires nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, liquid surface water, and gravitational stability within. Dr. Elias Vance's interruption was a scalpel sliding between ribs. He stood, rolling up the sleeves of his rumpled suit, and Ruiz, the Bureau's terraforming engineer, slid a datapad toward him with a grin. See, that's where things get interesting. The chamber's acoustics carried Vance's every syllable like a grenade rolling across marble. Your definition cites liquid water, yes? Not freestanding. He tapped the pad. Ruiz schematics unfurled. A dozen asteroids, their surfaces pockmarked with human domes. Our colonies on Ceres Beta, Vesta 9, and Pallas Minor don't violate your statute. Their water exists as ice, which we melt internally, liquid, but not surface liquid, technically compliant. A murmur slithered through the assembled jurists. The Xenthian delegates' bioluminescent frills flared violet. This is semantic trickery, Vance shrugged. It's engineering, and if we're being pedantic, he nodded to the linguist, Dr. Leon, who cleared her throat, the Galactic Charter's original Vrexian text defines inhabitable as capable of sustaining respiration. Our domes sustain respiration. Ergo, she spread her hands, Zyke 7's core temperature spiked. Legal perfection was its domain, yet this organism was dissecting it with its own tools. The panel will amend the statute to clarify. Of course you will, Vance said too cheerfully. But while you're at it, he flicked another file to the central display. The amended draft from last cycle banning atmospheric manipulation glowed accusingly. Your new wording prohibits artificial modification of celestial bodies. He tilted his head. Does that include mining? Because if so, the Galax Consortium's strip mining of Kepler-22b last decade just became a war crime. Or does it only apply to humans? The con artist, a wiry man named Chess, whistled low. Y'all really don't like double-checking your footnotes, huh? Zyke 7's appendages stiffened. It had crafted that amendment. Every clause had been mathematically optimized, yet the human had found not one, but 3 latent contradictions in under an hour. Across the chamber, the Thrissian jurist, a being of molten logic, leaned forward. This is unsustainable. But we cannot rebuild the legal framework every time they find a better way to read it, Vance finished. He loosened his tie, the fabric frayed from decades of courtroom battles. You built a system that assumes everyone follows rules the same way. Newsflash, we don't. He gestured to Ruiz. Show them the other thing. Ruiz activated a hidden subroutine. The projection shifted to a live feed, a human outpost on a rogue planetoid, its atmosphere a swirling cocktail of methane and ammonia. New Texas, Ruiz announced, classified as uninhabitable under your codes. But the camera zoomed in on a cluster of figures in pressurized suits herding 6-legged cattle. Turns out, with enough whiskey and stubbornness, anything's habitable. The panel's collective frustration was a tangible force. The Keith Moran delegate's crystalline carapace rattled. You bred livestock on a toxic hellscape? Yep, Ruiz said. Also, fun fact, your agricultural subsidies don't specify which kind of livestock. We're filing for reimbursement. Vance let the chaos simmer before delivering the final twist. Point is, you can keep closing loopholes. But laws are language, and language, he smirked. We invented fiction. Zyke 7 systems word recalculating. This wasn't just defiance, it was evolutionary. Humanity treated laws like a puzzle, not a cage. And the worst part, the amendments it was drafting right now, Vance was probably already circling the weak points. The Hall of Infinite Precedent hummed with the low-frequency vibration of alien frustration. High Arbiter Zyke 7's crystalline form pulsed an agitated violet, its geometric edges flickering as it processed the latest human affront. The terraforming loophole had been bad enough, but now Vance stood before the panel, grinning like a predator who just spotted a crack in the cage. Doctrine of Absolute Compliance, Article 17, Zyke 7 intoned, its voice a symphony of clipped precision. All signatory species shall adhere not merely to the letter, but to the spirit of interstellar law. Humanity stands in violation. The other arbiters, Keith Moore with their fractal logic cores, Vithuri jurists floating in containment fields, leaned forward, their forms radiating smug certainty. This was the panel's ultimate weapon, a law so fundamental, so pure, that not even human trickery could, Vance yawned. Your Eminences, he said, scratching his stubble. Ever heard of the Xerax exoneration? A ripple passed through the chamber. The linguist, Dr. Ruiz, tapped her datapad. A 4,000-year-old case bloomed above the central podium. The Xerax, a long-extinct species, pardoned for violating a treaties, spirit due to irreconcilable cultural divergence. The Xerax, Vance continued, ate their peace envoys, literally, and you forgave them because, and I quote, culinary ritual supersedes intent. He spread his hands. Now, if dining on diplomats gets a pass, why not our cultural need to creatively interpret? The Xerax lacked cognitive. The historian, Chaos, a nickname earned during the Martian tax revolt, cut in. But your archives state the Xerax had higher reasoning scores than pre-contact humans. He projected the data with a flourish. Face it, you cherry-pick spirit of the law when it suits you. The con artist, there no one knew if it was a name or a pronoun, chose that moment to drop the hammer. Speaking of spirit, they slid a vial across the podium. Ambrosian Moonfire, right? The Keith Moore arbiter recoiled. Moonfire was a hallucinogen banned for disrupting logical thought. Except, there purred, it's also a sacred sacrament for the Luminar monks, who, thanks to your religious protection statute, can import it legally. They grinned. So, is the spirit about morality or control? This is not the same. Zyke 7's voice spiked into ultrasonic fury. Humanity deliberately subverts, survives, Vance corrected. He tapped his temple. You ever wonder why we invented loopholes? Because kings, emperors, god kings, they all wrote laws to chain us. And we chewed through. He leaned in. You want compliance. Understand us. Otherwise, he nodded to Ruiz. The linguist activated her final gambit, a millennia-spanning montage of human history, revolutions, underground railroads, pirate radio broadcasts cracking sensors' walls. The spirit of humanity, Ruiz said softly, is to breathe where others suffocate. Outlaw that, and you're not arbiters. She met Zik 7's core. You're tyrants. The word tyrant hung in the air, corrosive as acid. The panel never tolerated such accusations, but the Xerax president forced them to. Zyke 7's light dimmed. For the first time in its existence, it hesitated. Vance saw victory. Move to dismiss, he said. The chamber erupted. The Hall of Infinite Precedent had never known silence like this. It wasn't the absence of sound, no, the chamber still hummed with the low-frequency vibrations of alien machinery, the rustle of jurists shifting in their crystalline thrones, the faint hiss of atmospheric regulators maintaining the perfect sterile air. This silence was deeper. It was the silence of a system breaking. High Arbiter Zyke 7's core pulsed an erratic violet, its fractal limbs stiff with something no member of the Galactic Arbitration Panel had ever publicly acknowledged: panic. Across the chamber, Dr. Elias Vance adjusted his rumpled suit sleeve, a human gesture so mundane it was almost insulting. His team, the linguist tapping her foot, the historian grinning like a man who just won a bet, the ex-con artist polishing a recording device, radiated the quiet confidence of predators who'd backed their prey into a corner. Zik 7's voice, when it finally came, was a blade of forced calm. Any species deemed inherently deceptive by unanimous vote shall be barred from interstellar affairs. The words hung in the air, a guillotine poised to fall. Vance exhaled, long and slow, as if savoring the moment. Then he nodded. Agreed. A ripple of surprise through the panel. The Caith-Moran jurist's exoskeleton clattered. The Vitharist tentacles coiled tight. However, Vance continued, before ratification, the panel must define deceptive for the record. Zix-Tot-7's core flickered. A trap, but where? The statute was flawless. Every clause had been triple-checked, every term cross-referenced. Deceptive, it intoned, is the deliberate misrepresentation of truth for personal or species-wide gain. Vance smiled. Excellent. Historian? The historian, a wiry man with a datapad covered in ancient galactic script, cleared his throat. Per the panel's own archives, case 12304B, the rise of the Zixian collective. He tapped the pad. Yeep! The chamber's central hologram flickered to life, displaying a millennia-old treaty. Your ancestors secured dominance over the Luminar sector by omitting key clauses regarding resource allocation. Strategic omissions, you called it. The panel convulsed. The Nyxandra jurists' multiple heads hissed in unison. The linguist stepped forward, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. By the panel's own definition, strategic omission is a subset of deliberate misrepresentation, which makes you deceptive, Vance finished. The chamber erupted. The crystalline floor vibrated with alien outrage. Zix-7's core flared crimson, its voice a thunderclap. This is irrelevant. The statute applies only to current actions. The ex-con artist leaned grinning, holding up a small device, pressed a button. Zix-7's own voice filled the chamber. Once the humans are barred, we can suppress dissent in the outer colonies without their interference. The recording cut off. The silence returned, heavier than before. Vance let it linger. Then, softly, deceptive, by your definition, high arbiter. And current. Zix-7's core dimmed. The light of its intellect, once unassailable, guttered like a dying star. Around it, the panel fractured, jurists turning on one another, hissing accusations in a dozen alien tongues. The Caith-Moran pointed a jagged limb at the Vithuri. Your species altered the Kessic Accords. The Nyxandra shrieked about hidden clauses in the Titan Proclamation. In the eye of the storm, Vance watched, a sound no one expected. Zix-7 laughed, not the cold, calculated hum of logic, but a raw, broken sound. You broke us! Vance stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying. No! Hope! You were already broken. You just didn't know it. The chamber stilled. The panel, for the first time in its existence, had nothing to say. Vance turned to the hologram, still displaying the ancient treaty. The Bureau of Creative Compliance moves for immediate dismissal of Final Statute 9 Alpha on grounds of panel misconduct. Zix-7's light pulsed once. A surrender. Granted. The human team didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The Galactic Arbitration Panel had just outlawed itself. The silence in the Hall of Infinite Precedent was thicker than the atmosphere of a gas giant. The crystalline walls, which had once hummed with the certainty of absolute law, now seemed to vibrate with something far more unsettling. Doubt. High Arbiter Zix-7's luminescent form dimmed, its usual geometric precision flickering like a dying star. Across the chamber, the other jurists of the Galactic Arbitration Panel, beings of pure logic, flawless reason, shifted uneasily in their saw platforms. They had been outmaneuvered, not by force, not by defiance, but by their own laws. Dr. Elias Vance allowed himself a single, slow exhale. His team, the linguist Ruiz, the historian Pirate, and the con artist Chaos, stood motionless behind him, their faces carefully neutral. They had won. But victory in a courtroom this vast was only the beginning. Zix-7 pulsed once, a gesture of reluctant acknowledgement. The panel concedes the motion. The words were a tectonic shift. For the first time in millennia, the architects of cosmic order had been forced to admit imperfection. Vance stepped forward, his boots clicking against the iridescent floor. With respect, High Arbiter, this isn't just about one statute, it's about the system itself. He gestured to the hologram still lingering in the air. Ancient treaties, contradictory precedents, the panel's own damning archives. You built a legal framework to eliminate chaos, but chaos isn't the enemy. Rigidity is. Ruiz, ever the diplomat, softened the blow. The Vithuri Collective's Treaty of Harmonic Balance failed because it assumed all species interpret harmony the same way. The Zyxian doctrine of absolute compliance collapsed because it didn't account for cultural context. Laws aren't equations, they're conversations. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Pirate, grinning like a scholar who just unearthed a universe-shattering text, tapped a control. The hologram shifted, displaying the panel's founding charter. Your own records say the arbitration panel was created to mediate, not dictate. Somewhere along the way, you forgot. Zyke 7's light flickered again. And what do you propose, Dr. Vance? A galaxy where laws are? Suggestions? Vance smiled. I propose a reformed arbitration council, one that includes human representatives, one that drafts laws with precision and flexibility. Because if the last few centuries have taught us anything, it's that no system is perfect, but the best ones adapt. To Dayu. For a long moment, Zik 7 was silent. Then, in a tone that might have been amusement, or perhaps resignation, it replied, "You would have us collaborate with humans." Chaos, unable to resist, leaned forward. Think of it as a partnership. We'll find the loopholes before they're exploited. You'll get airtight laws. We'll get a seat at the table. Everybody wins. The chamber erupted. The Kaith Moran jurists hissed in protest, their crystalline exoskeletons clattering. The Vithuri delegates coiled their tentacles in agitation, but Zik 7's voice cut through the discord like a blade. Enough. The High Arbiter's form stabilized, its light steadying. The Galactic Arbitration Panel was created to uphold order, but order is not stagnation. It turned to Vance. We will consider your proposal. 3 standard cycles later, the revised Galactic Charter was ratified. The new Arbitration Council, the word panel had been struck from the records, convened in the same crystalline hall, but the air was different, lighter. Human delegates sat alongside Zyxian logicians, Vithuri mediators, and even a disreputable-looking Nixandra who might or might not have been chaos in a very convincing disguise. One Hammett. The first item on the docket, a joint review of the Loophole Mitigation Act, co-authored by Vance and Zik 7. Ruiz, now the council's chief linguist, had insisted on defining mitigation 17 different ways, just in case. Back on Earth, the Bureau of Creative Compliance became something of a legend. Law schools taught Vance's strategies as applied hermeneutics. The phrase "pulling a pirate" entered the lexicon, meaning to dismantle an empire with footnotes. And chaos, inevitably, opened a consulting firm. As for Zik 7, the High Arbiter, now senior counselor, was last seen studying a centuries-old Earth text titled Common Law for Dummies. Its review, according to leaked reports, was a single line: illogical, inefficient, fascinating. The galaxy, for the first time in its history, began to breathe. Rudgeon's eyes. The revised Galactic Charter was not perfect, but then, as Vance often remarked to his students, perfect is the enemy of enforceable. Humanity's inclusion in the Arbitration Council did not end loopholes, far from it. Instead, it institutionalized them. The Loophole Mitigation Act became less a barrier and more a collaborative exercise, with species across the galaxy submitting potential exploits for preemptive review. The Nixandran delegation, in particular, took to the practice with alarming enthusiasm, submitting increasingly outlandish hypotheticals that Ruiz linguistics team spent weeks untangling. Zik 7, now stripped of its former rigidity, became an unlikely advocate for what it termed controlled unpredictability. It even adopted a human affectation, a small holographic gavel it would tap whenever debates grew too heated, a gesture it insisted was symbolically resonant if theatrically unnecessary. As for Vance, he retired from the Bureau of Creative Compliance, though rumors persisted he still ghost-wrote their most audacious briefs. His final act was to establish the Galactic School of Interpretive Jurisprudence, where budding lawyers, human and alien alike, studied the art of reading between the stars. The inaugural class included 3 Vithuri, a Caith Moran jurist who had to be physically restrained from citing precedent mid-lecture, and, according to unverified reports, a certain con artist auditing under the name Professor J. Wiles. The galaxy did not become orderly. It did not become fair. But for the first time in millennia, it became interesting. Disputes were no longer settled by cold, immutable verdicts, but by what humans called good faith shenanigans, a process that, while messy, had the distinct advantage of working. All laws are suggestions, some are just better written, terms and conditions may apply. Or, as Chaos would say, the alleged end, one Hoffend.